You're listening to the Diginauts on the Good Talk Podcast Network.
It's the Diginauts, episode 15, and this week we'll be talking about astronauts and what effect space has on your body.
How pacemakers could actually incriminate you.
And there's a hole in Fukushima, and the Republicans have decided that we can dump whatever we want in the rivers. It's all good. How are you going to die this week? We'll let you know coming up right after this. Society,
The future.
morality,
Disruption.
policy,
Humanity.
innovation, technology,
Morality.
the future, the law, humanity, society,
No defecating in the sand, Billy.
right?
Diginauts.
Greetings, Digi-listeners. Hello, it's the Diginauts again. I am Darren.
And I'm Eric.
It's the second week of February, and man, is there some shit going down in the politics world. But we made an important decision. We decided not to lead with a politics story this week. It's not like we're not going to talk politics. There's way too many science-related policy decisions that happen for us to skip over that. But it's time to lead with some straight-up science, as far as I'm concerned. So our first story today has to do with, I believe, astronauts.
It does. Two of them who happen, well, I'll say one,
Okay.
who happens to have an identical twin brother.
Ah.
Now that poses an interesting experiment, right? What if you send one into space for a year and the other one stays on land and you compare their bodies over time?
So are they both astronauts, or is one of them, I don't know, a janitor?
all I know is one's an astronaut and one
was in space
is
and one
not.
was not. Okay. One is, okay. One's an astronaut and one's a regular knot. Wait,
Exactly.
Okay.
Not a knot.
Anyway, so they're twin brothers. This builds in the nice control for a science experiment. They have the same theoretical, both nature and nurture.
Yep.
Controlled for the theoretically the only thing that should be different between the two of them is the space experience. I assume they weren't having the not astronaut brother, eating space food and all that kind of stuff. So it's not like the tightest controlled experiment ever, but
not everything was the same.
Yeah, it wouldn't have to be either,
Right.
though. Like you would see some. Okay. So what did they find?
One of the findings was that part of Scott, the astronaut's DNA, started to change, and then it changed back to the expected results once he came back. And this is part of the chromosome called the telomere, where as you age, they actually expect it to become shorter.
Right. So that's one of the theories of aging, is that the telomeres are basically kind of giving up the ghost over time. Like your cells reproduce over and over and over again.
Right.
In the process of reproducing, the end. My analogy, if I think of telomeres, is like when you zip and unzip something. Those two little metal posts at the end that kind of stop the zipper from going any further. Those are kind of like the telomeres.
Sure.
Right.
Or like Velcro wears down.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. and that's one of their theories, that if they could kind of control the loss of the telomeres and the DNA in general, that would help maybe not experience some of the effects. Whatever, we don't know,
Right.
science-wise, why we get older, but
Now, what's interesting, his actually got longer and then shrunk back to normal.
when he came to Earth,
Yes.
so they were testing his DNA while he was in space.
I believe so.
Space centrifuges and stuff.
I don't know.
I mean, they must have been, right? Otherwise, they
were
wouldn't know that.
definitely doing something.
Or maybe they can take blood samples and keep them and then test them when you get... that doesn't sound right. Anyway, so they tested his DNA. That's kind of fascinating, right? That has some serious implications. I mean, again, since we don't know, I don't think we can get and draw some conclusions, but that's fascinating. Like, that wouldn't be what you would expect.
Right. They definitely didn't expect that.
Cool. What else?
So, while scientists ultimately expect and know that there are differences in RNA between twins, right? There are mutations that come up.
We just all mutate all the time.
Exactly. So they are going to analyze both of their white blood cells to determine, like, did a space gene all of a sudden mutate in Scott's body compared to Mark's body?
Okay. So I hesitate to ask, but what is a space gene? Like, or what are they looking for when they?
I mean,
when they
to
say
me, similar to the other finding that, you know, the environment in space potentially has impacts on DNA itself.
I see. Okay. So, I mean, this is one of the things when we talk about space travel in general, right? You know that the human body is being subjected to all kinds of radiation.
Right.
We know that radiation has an impact, obviously, sci-fi aside, that sort of bombardment outside of the electric protection of the Earth is going to cause you to be hit with a lot more.
Yep.
To the point that all of the kind of grand schemes for let's all go to Mars, wee la da la, now
Not
on
so
Mars,
fast, Elon.
right? That you know, that's one of the biggies. So maybe that's one of the things they're looking for, I guess, is that that sort of like, hey, did increased radiation cause additional mutations?
Right.
I would think that would be one of the things you're looking for, but maybe they're also just kind of thinking space in general. Like, I'm sure this is kind of pure science at this point. It's not so much applied. If we send this guy up and we do this, will the following thing happen? It seems it's a little more pure science. Like, so what do we find? And then they'll kind of start, I would assume, drawing some conclusions and then doing more refined experiments based on whatever they can find out about it.
Yep. It'd be interesting if they did the same thing with, like, a plant. Like, just clone a plant, right? Send one up, keep one down here, or fruit, or whatever the case.
It makes sense. I mean, you would think they would have been doing that all along, right? I mean,
I don't know.
They always send up, you know, a million different things. I hadn't seen anything about the other studies, but now I want to go read about it. Good stuff. So, you know, assuming NASA's funding doesn't get all shut down by like tomorrow, damn it, I ended on politics. We'll see what happens with that. And since the next segment is all about defunding and moving and all that kind of stuff, I'm not so hopeful. We'll hitch up with that in a second.
Instead of a real ad, I'm talking to you. We need your help. Please go to the iTunes store, take some time, give us a rating, write a review, and share the podcast with your friends.
Okay, as promised, here it comes. Regulations, policies, and science. There was a lot going on this week. And so for segment 2, we're going to do something called If You Had to Choose. I left space for a drum roll, but I don't think I'm probably going to go back and put one in. I'm too lazy. Maybe I'll cut the space out, or maybe there'll just be a long pause. Anyway, hopefully people are still listening. The point of the story is we're going to tell you about 3 stories, and at the end of the day, you have to decide. I'm leaving space for a drum roll again. If you had to choose. In this case, it's if you had to choose, which government action would you reverse or would you stop from happening? And so all government actions. Well, so interestingly, a lot of the actions that are happening are reversals of government actions.
Fair enough.
Themselves.
Strike that
right?
from the record.
Yeah, exactly.
All of Trump's actions and appointees.
So let's hit
And Ivanka.
our 3 stories.
Kushner.
Oh, leave the family out of it. So the 3 stories that are worth noting, and a lot of this happened on a Friday afternoon, just to try to get that sort of like, wait, nobody look over here. Everybody go, sign this petition instead, so that we don't notice these things happening. So the first one I want to visit is pulling from a Gizmodo headline. Trump's new FCC chair is screwing up everything as fast as he can. Okay. Partisan bias built into that, obviously. And this particular story has a certain innocence to it if you stack it up next to the just plain evil that I would regard some of the other things as happening. But it is an indication of intent and trend. The new chairperson, Ajit Pai, is he took a few actions over the course of this week. Now, the first and perhaps most significant, while simultaneously being the smallest, was to cause the FCC to no longer look into free wireless accounts. It's a little tricky to parse.
Right. I mean, from what I've read, he was against kind of the subsidy on a monthly basis.
Well, that depends on which part you're reading, right? In general, it's just sort of like regulation is bad, right? And he puts it in the guise of like these free. You're thinking actually of the second action. The first part was to say, go ahead and have free wireless accounts. And the reason this touches a nerve for some is free wireless accounts tend to be AT&T handing you an account which you can then use freely with AT&T content,
right,
or third-party content that AT&T is paid to serve you quickly. So in other words, you have to read between the lines, but in other words, it's a strike against net neutrality.
Right.
It's not a big one. It's not coming in and full-on striking down net neutrality laws, but it's an indication of his stance on the idea of corporate versus public interest where communication is concerned. Not that we didn't know his stance a couple weeks ago, but actions speak louder than words on this. So it's a small thing, right? It's not we're going to make this happen, and it's not we've changed a law or a policy. It's just we're no longer going to look into it. But this is a lot of what the Trump administration is doing.
Hear no evil, see no evil?
Exactly. Let's no longer speak of that. Did you see, by the way, that the commission that oversees, we could probably throw this one in here as well, the commission that oversees voting machines, they've disbanded the oversight of the computerized voting.
Interesting.
Because I mean...
Who would need to do that?
Why would you? Who cares? Yeah. Anyway, he did a couple other things. One was, now this is what you were talking about, Lifeline. This was a program created in 1985 to bring discounted phone service to low-income consumers. So if you're talking about subsidies, that's basically what that is that it's
Yep.
an attempt to make sure.
Forgotten America will have...
Well,
less.
I mean, for fuck's sake, forgive me, but like this is basically making sure everybody has the ability to call 911.
No, I mean,
right? Like
that and internet to some extent.
Yeah, well, so it was passed in the 80s, so it wasn't an internet law at first, but they've kind of done some extensions, and and now it's like, yeah, here's the thing, no. From the article, the modernized order passed last year provided homes with a $9.25 credit per month that could be used to purchase internet services. So we're not talking blazing fast fiber optic.
Nope.
When it comes to it. But they did away with that. All of this done on a Friday. All of this done in these sort of like, don't worry about it. It's cool. Look over there. Last minute actions. And again, it's nothing major, but it's the sign of a trend. So that's government action number 1. Government action number 2 for you to consider is a court case, actually. So we can't blame the Trump administration here. This is about a judge, I believe it was a magistrate, a U.S. magistrate in Philadelphia, ruled against Google and insisted that they do have to hand over foreign emails to the FBI in investigations. Which is a tricky case. I don't know what you would even like. If I have my Gmail and you want to come in and check my Gmail to see if I emailed my wife about my intention to rob a bank, right? And you get your, I assume you get your warrant. I'm actually not positive because we were talking about foreign computer servers here, right? They may not have.
Were they overseas or were they?
Well, so there's a couple of different cases.
It gets weird.
And it gets really weird, right? Because you're essentially attempting to get access to a person's property. The email is considered property, and it's a funky legalistic terminology, which possessory interest, right? You have an interest in owning that thing, but they're borrowing from real estate in order to even apply that concept. And the judge has decided that starts from the point that you have the information passed over in the United States, which is really, really contrary to like cloud theory, right? To the point that Google was like, look, if you tell us we got to give you somebody's email, we don't know what country that file is living in. It's probably in 6 different countries, and it might be in different places at different times even.
And especially if it's replicated.
Right. Yeah, which for the sake of security, it has to be. And the complication here is that it could also furthermore be in violation of international treaties to force this. But nonetheless, we have an order against the interest of the internet provider.
Google should randomize where that's stored.
Right?
Like, how are you going to catch it?
Well, I mean, this is where it gets weird, right? Because in theory, they would be found in contempt of court, I guess, for not doing what they've been ordered by a judge. But
my point is, even before like this case, like I'm not saying now, right?
Yeah.
Maybe
just
going forward, right?
Principle.
Imagine if you're storing just pieces, like shards of data all over the place, which they probably are already, right? But it's like, well, you want this, you're asking for this, but that information's all over the world. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, they almost set it up the way with the Apple iPhone San Bernardino case, where it's like, look, the way to do what you're asking us to do doesn't exist, right? So if Google could design it from the beginning so that nobody can get that information, including them. Now, here's where it's interesting, right? Google doesn't want to do that because Google wants that data for its own selfish purposes. So, we don't want necessarily cast them in the role of the noble protector of privacy rights, because after all, they want to
do no evil.
They want to do no evil, but they want to make all money. They want to be able to look at that content, right, and find out about your profile and what to advertise to you. So they have to be able to do some retrieval. So it's interesting to be able to, like, how can they serve both purposes there? This is a complicated case because Microsoft had the opposite thing happen, where they've been embroiled in a similar case for more than a decade now over some servers in Ireland, and they had a court case.
A decade?
Yeah, it was like 2003, I want to say, that this started. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right? They went through one court case. The judge ruled in Microsoft's favor, and here's where I don't understand lawyerness, right? Because with cases like this, sometimes it's not about winning or losing. It's about whether or not the judge even decides to pick up the case. And so in their case, the judges decided they split 4-4 not to revisit the case. So the current position that Microsoft didn't have to turn things over stands, I guess.
Wow.
I guess 4-4 vote, the tie goes to the runner or something. I don't know how that works legally. I guess you would have to have enough votes to say, yes, we are going to pick it up again. But either of these cases could wind up in the Supreme Court, which, as we know, is currently split 4-4. So, long story short, our nation's in a bit of a cluster, both from the political point of view, and then in just terms of like regular operation of how we're going to handle our technology. So that happened. That's story number 2. And then story number 3, also, I guess I didn't think about it. I got 3 stories and 3 branches of government. The third one is about those clowns in Congress who have been exercising their rights under what's called the Congressional Review Act, which basically says that when it's a check, it's a congressional check on executive power. And it's a little complicated to understand. It goes back to, I wanted to say 96 or something like that. And it allows Congress to shut down laws and policies that were placed by departments under a president. And it provides for that to be speedier. And
it's related to like the coal dumping.
That's exactly what this is.
God.
This is the coal dumping thing. So the Obama administration went back and forth for a very long time. They finally said, yep, coal companies, you can't just take all your leftover shit and dump it in a stream, which seems like a no-brainer to anybody involved, to anybody who ever valued a stream, right?
We know Trump does.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, but again, this isn't his department. I mean, this is his cronies, I guess. But these really are 3 different things happening from 3 different branches of government. So this is, and there were a few different things. The stream protection rule, because the Obama administration didn't get that to happen until December. Essentially, they have the ability to, if they can get it through both houses of Congress, they can quick reverse any policy that happened in basically like the last 6 months. So they shut that down, which is interesting because it's like, in theory, before there was a law and then now that law is struck down, it's like gray area whether or not dumping and ruining things would be against the law. And now it's almost like, well, there's precedent for it to be legal. I don't know how that works, but right, if you think about it, it's kind of like, no, it's cool. It's basically what Congress has said.
But what about, can't states pass their own?
Well, that depends on whose opinion you want to ask, right? So, but in theory, if it's federal, it should be over the top. The one of the things that concerns environmentalists about this whole thing is that it's then tough for, say, the EPA to come back and put a new policy in place again because they've been shut down. So it would take, in theory, again, an act of Congress to do any reversal of the law. I don't know if judges could step in here, but by now, at some point, you're just getting into a pissing match between different powers in politics. All I know is for right now, if you're a coal company and you feel like taking tons of leftovers and just dropping them in the midst of an ecosystem, go for it. And there was a few other things that happened. Resource extraction rule. This is for mining companies. There's oil, gas, and mining companies had previous restrictions on the ability to accept foreign funds. That's going away. So essentially they have the ability to have business connections without necessarily telling anybody about it.
Putin.
Sure. I mean, there's no lack of mineral interest and oil interest involved in his side of things. I mean, this is definitely kind of in that Tillerson world. He was involved in lobbying previously, and now he's just going to be. Anyway. Methane flaring rules. We have they're restrictions on oil and gas companies operating in public and tribal lands to control their methane emissions, gone. Public lands bills, a Republican representative out of Utah has introduced a bill to sell off 3.3 million acres of public land in the West.
I think Patagonia said,
yeah,
see you later.
Yeah.
They pulled out of like retailers.
Right. I saw that story as well. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I can't remember a time in my adult life of such political turmoil. You know, and I was a kid in the Reagan had his finger on the button era, with plenty of stuff going, you know, but maybe it's social media, maybe it's 24-hour cable, you know, that has changed that. But back then I was like, oh, well, I hope the world doesn't blow up. I'm going to go ride my bike. And today it's a 24-hour stream of everybody's got an opinion. I mean, how many times a day do you get asked to sign a petition to tell somebody your opinion about what Congress should do? And I can't think of a time when there was so much flurry of oppose this, oppose this, oppose this. Yeah. So that out of Congress, they're flexing their muscles to reverse policies from the previous administration. So there we have it. We have three stories, right? We have the Trump administration. Looks like they're gonna try to give net neutrality the axe. We have the judge who is giving more power to the FBI, potentially at the detriment of user privacy rights. And then we have Congress saying, pollute away.
Yeah.
We'll make more.
Use your land and resources as you may.
Exactly. So which of those would you try to make go away, Eric? If you could only pick one where you could wave a magic wand.
Check all.
Right? You got a magic wand. That's the whole point of the segment is you only get to pick one. And if you had to choose, which of those would you reverse?
It's the last one, like
you think so?
The coal dumping, the methane, the land use. That one to me, like, I would want to reverse.
Yeah, that's pretty egregious. And it's, you know, with all of these, some of it I get the sort of like business versus the world, right? But to me, morality comes back to that whole like everything I ever needed to know I learned in kindergarten, right? So it's like, okay, take any of these things and change it to a kindergarten environment. You know, and let's say you're in kindergarten and you're digging in the sandbox.
No defecating in the sand, Billy.
Right? And yeah, exactly. So, and one kid decides to take a steaming dump in the corner of the sandbox.
Take a Trump.
That would not be allowed. Take a Trump. Yeah, exactly. Or to keep the metaphor, you know, further, if there's a water fountain, right, and you're just taking sand out of the sandbox and dumping it into the water fountain, right, continuously,
right. Drinking sand,
and then dumping it into the little faucet where the water comes from. And I feel like someone would say, "Hey, that's not right," and no one would disagree. Like there's no, like, the principal isn't going to come by and be like, "No, Miss Hannigan, don't." Whatever
silica
you do,
is good for the diet.
Exactly. And none of the other kids is going to be like, "Aw, but we want him to put sand in our water." Like there's no fundamental underlying any interest. No parent is going to come in and say, "Oh, you leave my child alone." Right? No. Every single person is going to say, "Yeah, it's in the best interest of every person involved not to dump shit where the water comes from."
And don't Trump in the sandbox.
I mean, I guess the metaphor is not perfect. If he were digging in the sandbox, it was, you know, nowhere else he's allowed to put the sand, and there are quarters buried in the sandbox. I guess that's what makes the analogy perfect. And so then now that kid can be like, "But if I keep digging, I get quarters." And screw you all, I have a water bottle, right? Like, I guess that makes the metaphor complete. But still, nobody would say that's okay. Go ahead and keep digging for quarters. We don't need the water fountain. No one would say that. And like how that doesn't translate to everybody when it comes to policymaking, I don't understand. But I guess it's not a logic exercise. It's just a straight up pocketbook exercise. So there you have it. I think number one has the potential to be giant. If it becomes a full on net neutrality case, like that's a thing that could give all the pipes of the internet over to companies in a way that, not that it's not like that now, but in a way that no one could ever start anything, right? Like if you can only listen to this podcast by giving AT&T a concession, right? Then no one can start anything up ever. So that's got a potential. Right now it's kind of tiny. Yeah, he shut down an investigation. Okay. But it's down the path. And number two, the judge, me and privacy. If I made it, you don't have the right to look at it. I don't care what country it's currently living in. So I think that's a big deal too. But I think you're exactly right. Like, yeah, the tangible effect
we could live right with those two others, right?
Yeah.
The direction the Earth is going, right? Not a good direction.
Right.
And to facilitate it getting worse.
Right. Go ahead and knock out all the methane you want. It's cool. The Earth will absorb that. Well, that's clearly not the case.
I'm just waiting for Kellyanne to say, cows are worse.
Yeah. Which, by the way, they might be to some extent. I don't know the exact measurements of these particular things they just reversed versus cows. There's definitely a case to be made for cows being a source. Still, that doesn't mean that you make it worse. I'll spare everybody the kindergarten metaphor on that one and just ask you what you think, as our listener, is the worst of the three. Which one of them would you want to stop? Or do you think none of them are such a big deal? Tell us why. Let us know if you have a preference, and we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to talk to you about it on future episodes.
You're listening to The Diginauts on the Good Talk Podcast Network.
Okay, segment 3 today is a segment called Hope for Humanity. I don't know why I decided this story belonged in Hope for Humanity. I guess I was just desperate for some hope, and so I wanted to pull that segment up. But this is a study, comes out of the University of Cambridge, and it's about using big data to look at people's communication patterns. And what they concluded was there's a link between swearing and honesty.
Shocker.
It seems a little intuitive if you think about it at first. Like, because you always see these studies that because I don't know about you. I was always told if you can't think of something else to say besides a swear word, then you have a small mind or whatever.
Fuck that.
Which is the only response to that grandma voice I was just doing. Yeah, exactly. But then you hear these contrary things that people who have messy desks are actually really creative and intelligent, and swearing is linked with intelligence and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of that I always think is kind of flimsy. Even this study is sort of yeah, okay. But there is a certain logic to it. They basically went through, they did two things. The first was a questionnaire of a few hundred participants where they were asked, this is the fun part, they were asked to list their most commonly used and favorite swear words. And then they were
Can you rattle off some?
Well, I don't know can I rattle off swear words in general? Yes.
From the study.
No, well, at least the source I'm looking at here did not specify what the swear words were. But what they were looking for was patterns in what the particular words were that people would use, etc. And then they compared that against a lie test to determine whether people were being truthful or not. And they essentially were looking for patterns of what they already knew, that people who tend to use the word I more often, are telling the truth more often. Like they already kind of knew that. They connected what they already knew about honesty with patterns in swear words and what those people's favorite swear words. And then comes the big data part. They then went into 75,000 Facebook users' accounts, measured their use of swear words on social interactions, and then looked to see for those same patterns associated with honesty. So they compared the two, and they draw the conclusion that, yep, the honest people tend to be the ones who swear.
Now, were these people in the UK or across the world?
I believe they did it in a couple different places. They recruited from across the United States, and they found that those in the northeastern states were more likely to swear than those in southern states.
Interesting.
Well, so the conclusion, or at least the theory that they draw, is that the reason that swearing links more to honesty is that there's sort of a social propriety that goes along with swearing. You should, if you hold yourself in check when it comes to using curse words, you may also be holding your tongue when it comes to what you really think. And folks in the tri-state area don't so much hold their tongue with what they think, as opposed to the folks in the South. Which, I mean, who knows? That seems a little bit stereotypical, what I just said, but not wrong. But then, well, what the fuck do I know? Thanks for listening to our podcast. We would love it if you would take a second to go write a nice review on the iTunes store or wherever you listen to our show. It's here. Eric, you know what time it is?
Don't.
Segment 4. Let's dig some more. Which means we start with Darren's official omnibus offering of Mother Earth dispatches, also known as Doomed. It's just what it happened to spell.
So it gets worse than what we just talked about?
Oh, environmentally?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. In case you hadn't yet shit your environmental pants. Yeah. Well, it was actually kind of a slow day in environmental news. slow week, couple weeks. Yeah, okay, the icebergs are falling apart. Like, there was no huge stuff going on, with a few exceptions. And so I'll just kind of focus on those. Well, there's one really biggie. But before I do that, we'll start with...
Make up your mind.
We're all going to die, is what I'm trying to say. So... one story is that your Netflix binge watching isn't doing the environment any favors. This comes from a scorecard out of Greenpeace, where they analyzed essentially the patterns of folks watching internet streaming content. And then they also looked at the sort of environmental practices of the companies that provide them. Now, I think the headline's a little bit clickbaity and not super useful, because it's like, on some level, it's like, hey, your energy use uses a lot of energy, right? Like, there isn't anything super deep about, well, if you binge watch stuff, that uses more energy than if you go mow your lawn, right? Well, I guess maybe mowing your lawn's a bad example. That's gas. If you go for a walk, so there's a little bit
Netflix and walk instead of chill.
Sure. Well, but you're still using the energy. You're just also getting some exercise.
Carbon offsets.
Well, you're putting out carbon the whole time.
I'm talking about the bullshit.
Well, but so
swapping.
This is exactly the point that Greenpeace was making, is that that they wanted to look at the different companies that people use to binge watch content. And
so you're talking about like the ISPs, or what are you
the different services? So Hulu, Netflix, Amazon, all those guys who provide the streaming content, they're the folks who have these giant server farms, and binge watching feels like, oh, I'm watching TV. But back in the day, a TV station would have some fixed amount of energy it would use to put its signal out on a regular basis. Now, the more you watch, the more energy you use, because you're You're causing further energy to happen as you watch. So this is, again, it's kind of a gentle reminder that, hey, energy usage is energy usage. But they also put the different companies on blast a little bit for the way they utilize their resources and which companies are good at, letting folks know about whether how their energy is used, renewable energy commitments, mitigation of the offsets like you mentioned, advocating for better energy use.
Does it cover use of solar or no?
Well, that would go under commitment to renewable energy.
Who ranked the highest on that?
So, specifically on use of renewables? Well, at the end of the day, there was one provider who did a good job, and everybody else on their grades was in the D's and F's. Really.
So who passed?
Well, take a guess.
Amazon?
No.
Nope.
Now, Amazon was decent. Amazon got a C. So they're the one. There was one A, there was one C, and everybody else was a D or an F.
Who's the A?
The A went to, get any more guesses?
No.
It's not Netflix. YouTube.
That makes sense.
Yeah. A bigger commitment to...
Yeah, they use oceans to cool the data centers. They use solar.
Yeah. So, well, it also even goes so far as to break down what energy type the different services are using in order to power all of their server farms. And in the case of YouTube, they're looking at, it looks like 56% clean energy. And the next closest use is 47 from Vimeo. Actually, they scored pretty high there and not as well in the other ones. Everybody else is in the 20s or the teens, or pook.co.kr. I don't know who that is. They're down at 2%. And 39% of Pook is fueled by coal.
Surprised Vimeo even made it on the list.
Yeah, well, they went with like 10, right? So if you dig as deep as 10 providers of content, you're gonna have to do that by necessity a little bit. They're probably also picking this up from previous years. So at the end of the day, YouTube, Google is doing a decent job on that. On the 5 criteria that they used to determine their overall grades, they gave YouTube an A in 4 of the categories, and nobody else pulled an A anywhere on the chart. There was a B for Amazon Prime in advocacy. There was a, I started that sentence assuming there would be another B on the chart somewhere, and there isn't. Netflix has a C for like mitigation, offsetting. Vimeo has a C for renewable procurement. But at the end of the day, there's work to be done there. And given that the internet is, 9 million times every year more content being watched.
So they only covered content providers, not the pipes by which people...
No, because that's a whole nother story,
right.
and that's not necessarily a pretty story either. Some good news out of Germany. They are launching a no emission. This is actually a really terrible headline in The Independent. Germany unveils zero emissions train that only emits steam. Like, that's just bad writing. It's not zero emissions if it emits steam. But the point of the story, for those who follow such things, is that they're intending to use fuel cells to power a train system that can go 500 miles a day at up to 87 miles an hour. So pretty impressive. And all it's going to put out is water, and then they're going to take that water and use it to turn into more hydrogen. And, one assumes. I don't know that part for a fact. But their energy use is being done in a way that doesn't have, at least on the running the train side of things, any deleterious effect. I always wonder with stories like that, like, what happens if every car is a fuel cell? Does it just start raining more everywhere, right? Like, if every car is putting off steam, it's always with anything environmental. The Earth can absorb a lot until you multiply it to the scale of humanity, and then I would think we would start messing stuff up. But nonetheless, positive step. And then we have Fukushima. Scientists sent a robot in to take a look and see how things are going. And
did it come out?
Well, they found the highest number of radiation, the highest amount of radiation that they had encountered in like 6 or 7, like since the right after the incident. So something's wrong. The robot went in, it captured what looks like basically nuclear waste has eaten through a grate. So I believe everything's kind of like underwater now. So they have to send in these like swimming robots to look and see. Or they were intending to send in a swimming robot. They sent in a camera on the end of like a arm of some kind. And they're pretty sure that the sort of second containment is going to be like, it ate through the grate, sure, but now it's on the second containment, which is why we have second containments. But I'm seeing, a giant radioactive pile of sludge that's just got to be eaten away at the second containment at this point, right? Like,
I thought they're going to freeze like an outer shell around it.
They're going to do all sorts of things. They don't know what to do. Because they had made a plan to go in and investigate further. They built a couple of like little robots that could withstand radiation. And their prototype was designed to handle radiation for like 10 hours, and then they could get it back before it would malfunction, or I think it was 10 hours or 2 days or whatever. Anyway, at the current radiation levels, this new spike, they're like, the robot's going to fry in 2 hours, actually. So they're not sure if it's even going to give them time to look around. So at some point, we just got to say, you know what, West Coast, you had a good run. It's been fun living here. And I don't know. The Pacific Ocean is vast, but I don't know what happens if that all escapes. Because that's there forever, pretty much. Not a good story. There is a tiny bit of positive silver lining to that story, which is some scientists have developed perhaps a way to deal with the disaster. What's unfortunate is that these scientists and the Japanese scientists don't seem to be on the same page about like, yeah, let's all work on this.
Why not?
I can't really tell. I mean, I think there's a degree to which culturally the country of Japan feels like they own this and they don't necessarily want to tell people. Because dig as I couldn't find out what was up with the radiation and the thing. And partly they just don't know, right? But is it in a containment? Is it underwater? Like the details on it are not so forthcoming. And I'm not suggesting some giant government cover-up, but there's not a lot of like, oh, let us sit down and tell you what's up either. So who knows? But a team from Rice University is working with a team from Kazan University in Russia. They have this like carbon filtration system. And evidently it's like a special carbon that you can find in Siberia that does a really good job of absorbing, the heavy metals that are involved, like strontium and cesium and whatnot. And they think that this carbon could filter out, at least like filter the water,
wow.
Right? So that... yes, we've still got this pile of nuclear sludge, but at least the nuclear sludge is contained in something that could eventually be placed into, I don't know what, a giant nuclear concrete vat of some kind. But it's not just like sending nuclear water out into the ocean.
Right.
So what I love, this is amazing. It was a paper published in the journal Carbon. So it's fantastic that there's a publication devoted to carbon out there. And they said that that they think that they could use this particular soil to work with the Japanese government and companies. I don't know. They said that maybe 6 months they could have a full filtration system ready.
That's impressive.
So here's hoping. We had another couple of stories that we wanted to follow up on. This segment for Dig Some More is always about the things that we've discussed on the show previously that we then wanted to come back and discuss further, either instances or developments that have happened since last we spoke. And one of them is about a pacemaker.
Yeah, so similar to, Fitbits, right? Activity trackers and whatnot. If you think about a pacemaker, a modern-day pacemaker keeps your heart going, inevitably, right? Until the battery dies or you opt to basically say, I'm done. Now, with that, the modern-day ones, you can track the respective performance of those pacemakers over time, and it's recording the data constantly.
Okay.
And a gentleman basically was accused of arson. And he's like, nope, I was trying to escape and gather my belongings and get out of the house. Well, they knew he had a pacemaker, so they had a warrant, got the data off the pacemaker, and consulted cardiologists. And basically they reviewed that data from the pacemaker, and they're like, nope, he didn't try and gather all his belongings. He didn't smash through a window to escape. Like, his readings were not in line with that type of activity at all.
So not enough physical exertion kind of thing?
Exactly. So the data that they looked at from the pacemaker included, obviously, his heart rate, how stressed the pacemaker was over time, and the rhythms, the cardiac rhythms prior to, during, and after the fire. So as you can imagine, in a fire, like, you're not just going to be calm. Right. You're especially not going to be calm when you claim to be, like, gathering all your belongings when your house is ablaze and trying to break a window, leap out the window, and run away.
Yeah.
So kind of busted. I think people just don't think about what's being tracked either. And who knows, if he even knew that, one, this was technically possible.
Right.
Nor did he likely know that it was being tracked, right? It's like when you get a pacemaker, it's like, do you have to sign away? Like, oh, I know that my rhythms and my whatevers are being tracked over time and can be pulled down and analyzed.
It's another case where it seems like the legal precedent seems to be, if we can track it, then they can get a warrant to see it.
Right.
Like, anything that's being collected eventually can be used against you in a court of law, which seems so weird, right? Because we have Miranda rights that like the law now says have to be spoken to you as you're arrested. Hey, if you talk, that goes to court.
Right.
But there is no Miranda rights. Maybe there is. Maybe as you speculate, that actually is something that gets done. But I really doubt it, especially for the first X number of cases. Usually it takes a case to come along to cause the controversy, and then laws happen.
Yeah, I mean, this one, I would not be surprised if this is a precedent-setting case.
I would think so.
I think everyone who has a pacemaker needs to know about this.
Well, and similar to the ones that we've discussed previously, right? Like the hot tub monitor with the alleged murder case previously. Right. Where they were tracking, or they're trying to get to his Alexa data.
Yep.
We know that that's not something that's been around long enough for there to be a lot of laws about it, because Alexa hasn't been around that long, right? So it's all definitely bleeding edge in terms of legal policy. I still come back to I still really don't know what I want to think about this one. I still want everything to be private. You don't have the right to subpoena things about me. I mean, I guess that's the whole point of a warrant, right? Is that like, hey, we're going to use the court-approved way of invading your privacy.
Right.
But still, that said, when it comes down to the fact that other people got hurt, it's like, well, no, go get them. So, interesting stuff. And it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I think ultimately we're going to get a code of law that influences what can and can't be done. And maybe it'll be state by state.
Yeah, I mean, you think about like other devices that people use to have a normal life. It's like, what about hearing aids? Like, do those store data? I don't know.
No, I don't know. I'm not sure why they would.
Don't know. But what if hearing aids were invented, right? That kind of like, when you're watching Netflix, Amazon. Yeah, like play back the past 30 seconds because I didn't hear what Billy said to me, and that's my grandson.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we'll just have to see. But there's another case. And I will say this. As the cases stack up, it does seem to trend towards the idea that law enforcement is getting their way.
Yep.
They've been stymied here and there, but it seems like a slippery slope towards if we suspect you, we can go find out whatever we want about you. And when I say that out loud, I don't like that. I don't like that pattern. And then our last story for today. This is a follow-up on the end of work.
Yeah. Yay! Candidly can't wait.
Right.
But, in some cases, people will be displaced, and we've talked about in the past that there has to be something for them to either do or some way for them to, have a means to an end, whether it be, fixed income or whatever the term. But China, who's renowned for their manufacturing capabilities, right, basically replaced, in this instance, 90% of human workers with robots. And
Wait. Not in China.
What?
Like at some factory.
In China.
Wait.
What do you
Seriously?
mean? Yes.
China has replaced 90% of its workers?
Oh, Jesus. Now I know what you're saying.
Okay. Well, the way you said it, if we use the replay button on my hearing aid to go back to what you just said.
Fair enough.
Anyway.
Valid point. A factory in China, right, replaced 90% of their human workers with robots. Mm-hmm. Not surprisingly, productivity skyrocketed by 250% and defects dropped by 80%. So clearly, right, like this is worth it in my opinion. Like I'd love to see more of this, not only over there but over here.
We shouldn't let humans do anything.
Well, not anything, right? There's some things, but in reality, humans created these robots, so it's not as if we become useless.
Right. So again,
right?
it comes
People
back
need
to my
be
thing that like,
repurposed.
The only job that anyone's going to have in the future is robot designer and robot repairman.
Yeah. I think that's fair.
I don't think it's a bad thing. I think if we could get to the place where we didn't have any work, great. Let's all go do whatever we want. And that's just fine. It's getting there that's going to be problematic, and all of the politics that will go into who gets to have what rights and powers and possessions.
But it's coming strong. So, like, this specific factory in Changying Precision Technology, they create mobile phones, and they have automated production lines. They used to have 650 employees. Now they're down to 60. And in the near future, they'll be down to 20.
Wow.
Furthermore, like, they're not the only ones who are considering this. Adidas is definitely shifting more towards robot-centric factories to create their shoes, which makes sense, right? And then a professor, Dr. Carl Benedict Frey, and Associate Professor Michael Osborne from the University of Oxford basically say, look, it's not going to be just restricted to manufacturing. So to touch on some of the other professions that'll be impacted by, robots. So we're talking about like masons who are building bricks and houses, budget analysts, tax examiners, tax collectors, butchers, meat cutters, retail sales, geological and petroleum technicians, sewing, searchers, watch repair, new account clerks, tax preparers, order clerks, loan officers, legal secretaries, operators, tellers, hotel and restaurant hosts, cashiers, real estate brokers,
prostitutes,
you name it. If you so desire.
I'm actually not making that up. There's a story out of the UK. They were calling it a blowjob bar, and said service was performed by androids. Oh, God. I kid you not.
I believe it. So, no matter what, obviously a broad range of
that's
professions, it's going to happen fast. It's going to happen faster, I think, than anyone can even ever imagine. I think people are going to have a lot of leisure time on their hands. So it's more about like, how do you cope with that and account for that?
Well, and how do you survive the transition from here to there, right? Like, I think you want to get there at the top of the game. If you get replaced early, you're going to suffer. Because I don't think we're going to just suddenly like, hey, society is utopian and everybody has an allowance that they're given and you can go get those Adidas you want whenever you want. Just ask for some. The robots will make you some. It's cool. Like, we're not going to wind up there. We're going to wind up in the kind of turmoil, like, the rich are going to have everything and the poor are going to have nothing. And there's going to be 3% of the people are going to be rich and 97% of the people are going to be poor. And it's going to be a little rough before we reach that point of like, oh, wait, never mind. We have all the food we need.
Right. It'll either go well or not so well. All right. Like, it'll be like chaos for the people who are displaced, and maybe they'll riot and rebel against the machines, or right, and then maybe the machines go away, and it's the resurgence of the human way. But then I think it's going to keep reverting back to the machines. Yeah,
we may have little cultural shifts and appreciations and Luddite movements and whatnot, but at the end of the day, the writing's on the wall. I guess I'm just saying, like, my advice to anybody fresh out of college right now would be, don't go learn something. Learn how to learn something, because that's going to be what's going to help you survive. Because whatever job you're doing right now, you won't be. So, all right. So that brings us to the end of another show. We would love to hear what you think about all the topics we talked about today. Are you afraid of your job being replaced by a robot? I know I am. If you come back to the Diginauts next week, you'll hear
the robots
X4306 discussing with X6. Maybe they, instead of discussing technology and policy, maybe the robots will discuss humanity and policy.
Well, it'll be like the Google Home talking to the Amazon Echo.
Right. Exactly. In a nice circular, you have this on your calendar conversation. So let us know about everything we talked about, the effects of space travel on the human body, which of the 3 subjects in our segment 2 you would most like to be able to wave a magic wand and go away. And are you a frequent user of curse words? You know what? I'm going to go ahead and say, open her up, hit us on Twitter with your favorite curse word. Let us know. We'd love to hear from you. You can speak to us at Good Talk Network, or I am at Digital Darren, which is spelled DERON for some reason.
And I'm at eFader.
We have a phone voicemail line for you, 323-686-8255. We'd happily share your commentary on the air. Not really the air, it's podcasting. In the show. And don't hold back. Let us know. What's your favorite curse word? What's your least favorite policy being enacted right now? We want to hear from you. Thanks very much for listening. Good talk.